Good morning, friends of the Museum of South Texas History. My name is Francisco Guajardo. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the museum. And so on this day in November of 2022, we welcome you to this month's edition of Museum Pláticas. We have a special guest today. And so, Tony, if you can just zoom out because I want to introduce our special guest here. Our special guest here is Annie Miller. And so Annie and I are going to have a plática. We're going to go on break, and then when Annie comes back or when we come back, Annie and I are going to have a plática about a very, very unique relationship that this museum hopes does not become unique, because we have a relationship here in how the museum and a community in South Texas are teaming up to do something about preservation and presentation of history. So, Annie, you and I are going to have that conversation. So that's the next segment. Then we have a third segment where Pamela Morales, and I will talk about how the museum is using technologies to really expand and enrich its programming. This thing here that we're doing, the Museum Pláticas, is but one example of how we're integrating technological functions to really add depth to the work of the museum. So when we come back, Annie and I, two former Longhorns, right? I'm wearing my boots today, Annie. I don't know if you know that, but I'm wearing my Texas Longhorn boots. I'm going to show you my boots in a bit. But when we come back, we'll engage in a conversation about a very special relationship that we have. And then later, Pam will be on. And so we're going to have some fun talking about museum work. So stay with us.
Give the gift of history and lifelong learning to a special family member or friend this year. A Friendship to Most History offers access to the museum free of charge, notices of upcoming programs, quarterly editions of Borderlines, and a discount on most purchases in the museum store. Give a meaningful gift this year. Happy holidays!
Welcome back to Museum Pláticas, friends of the Museum of South Texas History. So we have a special guest with us today, a local girl who grew up in McAllen, and she has, I think, a very, very compelling personal story. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But we also want to get to the relationship that we have with Annie's community, which is, I think, a very historic community in South Texas and a very important community in South Texas as well. So, Annie, welcome to the museum.
Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Because we have not had you on Museum Pláticas. I think that it's important for the world to know who Annie Holland Miller is. So tell us a little bit about, what your story is. You were raised in McAllen, but you come from a family that has a very interesting kind of trek, in getting to South Texas. But a little bit about you, and then maybe grow the story with the story of the family.
Sure. So I was born and raised here in McAllen, born at the hospital downtown, and attended McAuliffe for elementary school, Travis for middle school. I spent a year at Rowe when it was a ninth grade school, graduated from Memorial, and went off to the University of Texas. While I was there, I had some incredible opportunities. I served as president of the student government my senior year, and then went on to go to law school at UT also. After law school, I went to Washington, D.C., worked for Laura Bush, and then worked in the West Wing for a year on domestic policy issues, and loved it. And while I was there, fell in love with a McAllen boy, Kramer. We went all the way to D.C. to fall in love and come back to Texas. I ended up moving home in 2006 to work with my family, and have been here. We were in Houston. We were in Austin for a bit, Houston for a bit, but came home. It's been, I think, 11 years now, almost 12 years. And we can't imagine being anywhere else. So my family's background, my mom came to McAllen, I think second or third grade, from Corpus. She was born in Corpus. My dad was born and raised in Cuba and came actually to Brownsville when he was about 12 years old with my grandparents. My grandfather, my father's father, had gone from Poland when Hitler started to take over in Europe. He had gone from Poland, tried to come to the States, but the quotas were such that they were full. So he was turned away, and he ended up going to Cuba, where he had 2 sisters, I think. There he married my grandmother, who was Cuban. My father was born and raised there. And then when Castro started to take over in Cuba, they moved here to Brownsville. They had some family. My grandfather had some family in Brownsville.
So, what are the names here, like of your grandfather, and then who would marry your grandmother who was in Cuba? What was your grandfather's name?
So my grandfather was Shama Holland. It's Szama. My grandmother was Caridad Alfonso. And
Did you get to know them?
I did. My father's an only child, and my grandparents were very close. They always remained very close to us. They were in Brownsville until I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and then they moved to McAllen and lived 2 or 3 doors down from us the whole time as I was growing up.
About what year would your father and your grandmother have been born?
Oof, my grandfather.
Your grandfather. So when Hitler begins to take over, he
Right.
would have been like maybe 10, 12 years old?
He was probably, I think he was about maybe 16 at that point, 16 or 17, when he made the trek, right? When he left. He was one of, I think that there were 8 or 9 living siblings at the time, and so they went everywhere. They went all over, and he did have 2 sisters in Cuba. So some got to the United States, some, they were all kind of went all over.
And in the old country, where were they in Europe?
They were in Poland.
So when the Nazi army invades Poland in September of 1939, he was already gone.
Yes.
Okay, and they had gone because the writing was on the wall, right? That this was going to happen.
Right.
And so this is a Jewish family
Right.
that leaves Poland
Right.
because there was already persecution of Jewish people, in Europe going back to a long time, right? But
Right.
the intensification of it through the Nazi Party would have been especially intense in the early 1930s and leading up all the way to the war. And so he would have been right there in that
Absolutely.
early 30s
Right.
when they come to Cuba. Who were his sisters who came to Cuba? Their names.
I know that his sister Mary was in Cuba, and I'm not sure which other sister was there.
But you never met them?
So I met some of the sisters. I remember one event, and I can't tell you what it was. It was a bar mitzvah or a wedding or something somewhere in Texas where we all went. And I want to say that there were 4 or 5
Wow.
of the kids there. There was one aunt, Mary, who spoke all of the languages. So they all of them spoke Yiddish. Maybe they all spoke Polish, but because they all went different places, they all spoke different languages. So like my grandfather spoke Spanish. My grandfather never spoke English. He spoke Spanish, he spoke Yiddish, and that's what it was. So Mary spoke all of the languages that the siblings spoke. And so she was sort of the connector for everyone.
Was the name Holland like you spell it today when it came across?
I'm not sure what it was originally. I don't know. I don't think it is. But, our Holland is unique because it's with one L, Holland. Oftentimes you'll hear of Hollands with 2 L's, Holland. but ours is one L.
Was that an issue when you were going to school?
Always.
Like everybody would misspell your name?
Always. It's an issue. We named my daughter is her middle name, but the name she goes by is Holland with one L. So unfortunately it's an issue for her. We like to be difficult with names in our family.
Because your boy is named Kern,
That's
which is
right.
a whole other story.
That's
because
right.
that's, yeah.
That's right.
So, okay. So that's a compelling story there. Very interesting story. That's not like this traditional South Texas story of people coming from Mexico or somebody coming from the Midwest. This is yet another kind of wrinkle
Right.
to this kind of like historical narrative of South Texas. This is fascinating. But there's another story here. And really the reason that we're having this Plática today is because you have been, your family, the Holland family, and now the Millers, right, are very much a part of a Jewish community that practices its own faith in very particular ways. And so a lot of this is organized around the temple,
Right.
Emmanuel. And there's a story there. So what's the story and what is it that we're doing with this?
Yeah, so, I think about 5 years ago, I was the programming chair for a women's group at the temple called the Sisterhood. And we try to come up with unique programs so that our members will come and participate. And I had reached out, Kramer at the time, my husband Kramer was on the board here. And so I had reached out to the museum to say, let's have a presentation from the museum on what you have as far as the history of the Jewish community here. And we were so excited. We typically our sisterhood events are only for women. It's only for the girls. But we were so excited about this. We opened it up. We said anybody who's a member of the temple should come and learn about our history. And when you all came to do the program, you came with one hanger from one of the stores in downtown McAllen that was owned by a Jewish family, and there was one other item, I can't remember what it was. And so the message was, this is all we have. This is all we have to tell this story. And there was such, I knew, and many of us know that there is such a rich history and story. And so we finished the program that night, and it was like, look, what can we do to tell our story, to bring that information together? Life got in the way, COVID got in the way, all these different things. But recently, we've been working, my son is preparing for his bar mitzvah. We've been spending a lot of time at the temple. And we have a library in the temple where we have all of these scrapbooks that people have put together over the years. And I would go.
I was looking at the screen because we're showing images of the scrapbook.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I mean, Pam may put them up again just so you can see. But continue with your story, yeah.
So there were all these scrapbooks, and I would share with Kern. I would sit with him and show him, this is the history of the Jewish community here. And this is why being Jewish and learning these traditions is so important. And I suddenly realized that these scrapbooks have been sitting on a shelf in the library, that we don't utilize them a lot. We don't tell the story a lot. And it really dawned on me that this was an opportunity to circle back with you, and particularly because I had been at a dinner where you had talked about Freddie Gonzalez's letters. I thought, this is another story we need to tell. And so, reached out, and we talked really at first about what we could do with these scrapbooks, but then really developing it more into a conversation of how do we tell the story, not only of the community, but of the individuals who have greatly impacted South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley through produce, through law, through business, all these different areas, who also just happen to be Jewish. And I think that right now we are living in a time, I think always, right? Jewish people have struggled to tell their, not just to tell their story, but for the greater community to understand, what is Judaism? What does it mean to be Jewish? Right now we're in a very bizarre time, a time where I'm having to help my children understand the importance of being proud of their background, but also being careful. And so I can't think of a better time or opportunity than to partner with you and be able to tell this story through the museum.
The way you characterize it is, at least in my mind, quite poignant. To be proud and to be careful. Annie, has that been your reality in life, or is this just kind of an emergent theme because you're raising children and helping them understand who they are?
No, I think it is. I think it has been a reality for Jewish people, and some of it, I really believe in the good in people, and I really want to believe that most people may just not understand Judaism, the differences, the isolation, or the feeling left out that can occur when you are Jewish living in a world that is predominantly Christian. And so I have always felt that it was my responsibility to teach. During the high holidays, I send a message out to friends who are Jewish and not Jewish, explaining the high holidays, asking forgiveness for anything I may have done intentionally, unintentionally, which is part of our tradition, part of what we do between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in preparation for the Day of Atonement, which is Yom Kippur. But I've always tried to share that and to explain it so that people really understand why. Why shouldn't we have homecoming on Yom Kippur? Well, because you wouldn't have homecoming on Easter or on Christmas Day. And so I feel like the more I can educate people about what these different holidays or rituals mean, the more barriers it breaks down.
What is it about you that you feel this sense of responsibility when, or where others may not? What is it? Like, was it about your father? Was it about your mother? Was it about the life story, say, of your father? Is there a seminal moment? What's the source of inspiration? What is it?
Yeah, I am very driven and feel a real, I'm not sure what the word is. I feel very driven by a sense of community. And there are so many parts of this community, right? Like this community, the Rio Grande Valley community, this community, the Temple Emmanuel community, this community, for me, the McAllen ISD community. All of these communities built me into who I am today. So I feel a responsibility to give back, to teach, to be part of and actively involved in the community. I think that that's a lot of it for me.
So I would like to use the notion of community as a segue to really talk about how the museum sees this as having great value. We struggle with helping the community understand the heightened importance of preservation.
Right.
Our whole mission is about to preserve and present history and heritage of the region. And yet it is a challenge for people who are just living their day-to-day life, survival, making sure that the family is intact or whoever may be there. And so preservation becomes an afterthought. It's not high on the priority list. So to have the Temple Emmanuel, to have this community of faith that says we want to do something about preserving our history, and interestingly, I mean, it's always been in you, it seems, but having Kern being prepared. And so tell us a little bit about Kern. How old is he? And that sort of thing. And when is a bar mitzvah? And why does this become important for him? And then I'll get back to my narrative here.
Sure. So Kern is, he's a 7th grader at Morris Middle School in McAllen. He's 12. His bar mitzvah is in March. So your bar mitzvah is your coming of age in the Jewish faith. It's when you become a man in the Jewish faith. You do a huge amount of studying. He started, most kids start their Hebrew classes probably 2nd or 3rd grade. And so they are learning Hebrew in addition to Sunday school, in addition to regular school, in addition to sports, all those things. He will lead a service Friday night. He will lead a service Saturday morning where he will read from the Torah in Hebrew. And it is tough. It is hard to pull him away Friday night from, last week he is playing baseball for Morris, and they had a baseball tournament. They had a game Friday at 4:30. After the game, a bunch of the boys wanted to go out to dinner. Well, our services are Friday night and Saturday morning. And as we are leading up to the bar mitzvah, it's really important that we are at those services. So he got to go to dinner, but I had to go pick him up to take him to services. And we talked about how when we get to March and his friends see all of the work he has done to prepare, and when he gets through it, how amazed his friends will be, but how amazed he also will be of himself. So a big part of getting to that point, I mean, at 12 years old, it's hard to appreciate that, understand that. And so telling the stories, right, of the people that came before who had struggles. We talk about how for us, and it's this way, I would say, in most places, unless you live in a community that is predominantly Jewish, every day it is a choice and it is a fight to be Jewish, to live Jewish. And that's hard to appreciate and understand when you're 12 years old.
So the whole act of getting to more macro kind of, perspective here, the whole act of preserving the records, scrapbooks, the stories, and then formalizing this through a collection at the museum, I think is important for the temple, for the community, but it's also very important as an example of how.
Right.
And so that's how we're thinking about this. This is a model. Right. How we can encourage other communities to really think about this is how you can preserve and will help you present.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's so unique, when we were at that dinner and you were talking about Freddie Gonzalez's letters. I grew up here. I drove past Freddie Gonzalez Road or Street, whatever it is. My grandfather was at the Freddie Gonzalez Veterans Home. I knew the name, but I realized suddenly, right, I don't necessarily know this story. And what you all do is you tell the stories. And if we as a community will engage, will learn and understand those stories, it really teaches us so much, not just about the people around us, but about the culture that has been built here. The Valley it's such a unique culture. It's such a unique culture. I am so proud to have been raised in this culture. I am so proud to be raising my children in this culture. It is a culture of inclusivity. It is incredibly diverse. Probably more limited diversity when I was growing up, even than there is now. But it is important for us as a community to learn and understand that, and how and why we are what we are today.
When you look through the scrapbooks and you look at the stories of the temple, there's one inescapable theme, at least in my reading of it. It is a theme of how women have driven this whole process of archiving, the process of leadership. I mean, there's evidence here of how in the 1950s, this is probably pre-temple, how there were women as part of a Jewish like an organization, national organization of Jewish history, and there were McAllen Jewish women already, in leadership positions in the 40s, in the 50s, and then women engaging in programming. I think probably before we sign off here, we got to talk about some of the programming, the Just for Men programming, the deli programming. Can you speak to what that's about that actually has a long history in McAllen with the temple?
Sure. So we just had our for men, well, it's now called the deli lunch. It originally started as the for men only deli lunch. Before the deli lunch, there was a lunch that was created by the sisterhood called the tasting lunch, and it was for women, and they would cook different Jewish foods using different recipes, and you would come and you could have a taste of different things. And I think the event, from the stories I've been told, right, the event had sort of run its course, and they were trying to come up with something new and different. And this was, when I first think about the for men only deli lunch, right, I think, this was like in the 50s, the 60s. No, it was 1982 was the first deli lunch. And
so there we're seeing a 2003 newspaper clipping when this thing had already been going 20 years.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so we started, the first was January 1982. And it was coined the for men only deli lunch. The idea was that we would sell tickets to the greater McAllen community, not just the Jewish people in the community. And only men could come to the temple and sit and have lunch. And there's been a lot of discussion about why was it only men, And a big part of that was that at the time, there were all these luncheons around town for women. But there were very few organized opportunities for men to get together and go to a charity event, a lunch event. Typically, even now, when you go to a lot of these luncheon events, it is primarily women there. So the women felt, well, let's create something where men can come and just have this lunch. The food, at the time, we didn't have delis. You didn't really have the deli counter at HEB. You couldn't buy corned beef. You couldn't buy salami. So locally, so they did turkey because turkey is comfortable and people know it. It's safe. Turkey, corned beef, and salami. They do potato salad and coleslaw, and the recipes for the potato salad and coleslaw are original recipes. So all of this food is made at the temple. The women come, they prepare all this. At some point, we started allowing takeout, so women could come pick up their meals and take them out. And this year, we changed the name. It's called the Deli Lunch, and men and women could come and sit at the temple and enjoy their lunch. This year, typically we have this in February. We had not had it for a couple of years because of COVID, and it was time. It was time to do it. It was time to remind ourselves how to do it. It is huge vats, the big Tupperware plastic containers of coleslaw and potato salad. So this year we sold, I think, about 2,300 tickets.
Wow.
So imagine 2,300 scoops of potato salad and coleslaw. It's a lot of food that is all made there at the temple. Originally, we had a lot of people, a lot of the Jews that were in our community were in the produce business. They would donate the produce, and it obviously was a huge benefit and a huge help. The women would make the coleslaw, the potato salad, and the containers would be taken back to the produce sheds and refrigerated so that they could keep everything safe until the event. So.
Well, and that has got to be, I mean, a great event just in terms of community building, in terms of getting the word out, in terms of bringing other people in, and it's probably a good fundraiser as well.
It has been historically a great fundraiser for us, and it's really fun to watch because it's been in late February during the political years. You see, it becomes overrun with politicians working the room, talking to different people. You have a whole mix of people, and there are definitely people who have come to our temple, come to our synagogue, just for this event. They never even knew that the temple existed until they came for this.
Well, you know what? When you do it again, we need to take people from the museum out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just want to read to you what one person said. Thank you for the Pláticas. It broadens my understanding and appreciation of the Jewish community. This is something that someone said. So you telling the stories the way you're telling them has at least touched one person, which means that it's a lot of other people as well. Annie, what have we left out that you want to share with us this morning?
I think a couple of things. One is really, I hope that people are willing to open their minds, to be open-minded, not just about the Jewish community, right, but all these different sub-communities we have here. I think the other thing would be to share how important it really is to preserve these things, to tell the stories, to get in touch with you, with the museum, when there is important information, when you're cleaning out homes, when you're going through organization documents. It is so critical for us to preserve these things, to be able to tell the stories. And I'm so grateful, and our community, our Jewish community, is so grateful to the museum for helping us. So excited to have our scrapbooks digitized where we can actually share them with people and be able to post pictures. We posted, I had taken a picture of one of the scrapbooks and posted it on our Facebook page, on the Temple's Facebook page. And someone who has not lived here, who grew up here but hasn't lived here in years, commented on the picture and said, "Oh my gosh, that's my mother. Thank you so much for sharing this picture. I remember this." And it's so great to be able to share that with people and remind them too of their connection to South Texas.
That's such a beautiful story. I think that what we want to do, Annie, is very much like what you are suggesting, is that we want to nurture tolerance. We want to nurture the sense of understanding each other. And so one of the best ways to do it is to see where we've come from and look at our documents, look at our photographs, look at our letters. We were talking about letters earlier. You made reference to the Freddy Gonzalez letters. You know that the letters of Freddy Gonzalez, you can find them online.
Right.
We have them. Anybody wants to see them, read them, we have them. So the scrapbooks are going to go there as well so that the world can see them and hopefully make the world a little bit more understanding.
Yeah, and I hope we can move, I hope we can move beyond tolerance. I hope we can move to appreciation, right? Tolerance is like, okay, I'll put up with you. Appreciation is saying, wow, that may not be my belief, that may not be my world, but I appreciate that is yours, and I honor and respect that. And that's really what I hope we can get to.
Yeah, and then the next level after that would be participation. Like
Right.
if we can participate in doing things with each other. And I think that it happens a lot. But when we tell stories of how it is happening,
Right.
I think that we can all grow up in more healthier communities.
Absolutely.
Annie, thank you very much for reaching out, first of all. And thank you also for, for talking to your temple, because this could have been just the idea of one person, and then other people may not want it. Whereas it turns out your temple does want it.
Right.
Your community does want it. And so I think that not only the museum, but the whole community is richer for that. So thank you for doing that. And so we're going to sign off with that.
All right.
Okay. All right. So when we come back, we're going to have another plática, and that plática will be with Pam, and we'll talk about the technologies we are employing to enhance the work of the museum. And so we thank Annie as well for being here today. And so stay with us.
A Friendship to Most History offers access to the museum free of charge, notices of upcoming programs, quarterly editions of Borderlines, and a discount on most purchases in the museum store. Give a meaningful gift this year. Happy holidays!
Welcome back to Museum Pláticas, Friends of the Museum of South Texas History. So we just had this conversation with Annie Miller, which I think was terrific. I'm going to lower the volume on my phone here because I'm listening to my phone, watching on Facebook. So if anyone has any questions, I want to be able to see it. Pam, what did you make of the conversation that we had with La Plática with Annie?
I thought it was super awesome because we actually did meet with Annie, the communications team. So I'm on the team, and so is Tony Pena, who's behind the camera. And we actually had gone to the temple to go see her because I had gone the first time to take photos of her donating the scrapbooks. So I took photos of that. And then she asked if we could record a presentation that she wanted to do with the ladies about the for men only deli lunch. And then it just sort of, we were hearing these stories and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so great. And then just hearing her again mention these stories, but then also giving more context, I thought was really great. I don't know. I love that she is taking initiative to preserve her history and her heritage.
So maybe we'll do a little bit of that, Pam, but let's step back a little bit and talk about who you are, where you're from, how is it that you get to the Museum of South Texas History?
So I'm Pamela Morales de Hendricks. The Hendricks is for my husband. I like to proclaim that I'm very traditional Latina, so I'm like de Hendricks out in public. I grew up in FAR, graduated from PSJ North, went to UTPA. I'm dating myself. Graduated in 2011, and then I kind of had little jobs here and there. I worked at Telemundo for a little bit, doing some work over there behind the scenes, and then I went to work for a city government, and then came here to the museum, just to expand my knowledge and, do different type of things. And I came to the museum in 2015 at a time where part of their strategic planning, which I just found out as we've been doing this strategic planning this past year, is they wanted to put the museum out in the media world. So like social media, Facebook, YouTube, they were having these plans of having the museum become more digital. So I took that initiative, and in 2015 I kind of just went on and I did some videos for the museum, the Most History Collection series. A lot of people seem to be watching those, and they like those, and it's basically based off of the collections that we have. And then I was doing event coverage, so I was taking photos, I was doing videos of all the events that we do, recording the Sunday speakers, audio only, and then did the podcast, and then 2020 hit, and I realized I'm doing a lot of work, and then that's when Tony came on board. So now it's really a team effort, doing the whole media stuff.
What is your training like?
So I studied broadcast journalism. Basically, I wanted to be a TV reporter. I wanted to be in front of the camera. But then somehow I just ended up being behind the camera, and that really solidified that is what I wanted to do in life. Like, I wanted to create things with a camera. So I did a lot of student productions while I was at UTPA, and then I did when I was at Telemundo, I did some other jobs, like doing commercials. So I actually helped do commercials for the Jeep, what's his name? The Jeep salesperson, I can't remember. It's off the expressway. That's all I remember. So I did a couple of those there. And I, worked on some other things. I actually was like a producer for a boxing thing that they had at the city of FAR. So I did some of that stuff. So my training's really video production.
Mm-hmm. And so when you came to the museum, you had already had a little bit of a taste of broadcast journalism through Telemundo. You worked behind the scenes, I think you said. And then you went to municipal work, government work, city of, and so you got a chance to do other kinds of media work. and you probably even did like events, setting up equipment, writing probably press releases, and so and I'm guessing also writing stories for the city.
Yeah.
So when you came here, you had kind of a sampling of experience of things, and then the museum said, we're in the middle of our strategic plan. Maybe they didn't say it to you, but that's kind of how you came in. And so we want the world to know us through social media platforms. And so you come in and you create videos, you said, and then you kind of develop a presence on YouTube,
Yes.
maybe on
Yeah.
Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of like you come in and then you do that maybe in the first couple of years. So 2015 to 2017, more or less. So what is it that the work has been like that you can say to the world, I want you to pay attention, world, to these 2 or 3 different things that we're doing at the museum that are very media driven, very storytelling driven, very maybe museum Pláticas driven, right? So what is it that you can say to the world, this is what we're doing consistent with our mission, which is to preserve and present? Speak to those signature kind of programs.
So I find that interesting that you brought up the preserve and present, because I do remember having a conversation about this with other staff members about, what is it, what like is the work that I'm doing, or the communications team, are we in line with the museum's mission? And we are, because we are preserving by documenting and recording and archiving, and we're presenting because we're live now. So I would say that right now, Museum Pláticas is probably our best one. As you can see, we have an award. I was a little nervous about actually submitting it for nominations, because since I've been here, I had never done that, and I feel like Museum Pláticas really captures what we're trying to do. Because we had this idea, actually, you and I, when the pandemic hit, we were kind of doing something similar where we would get on Teams and then we would record, but then we got this equipment through grants, and I thought, well, why don't we actually go live? It's just easier, it's better, and let's feature staff, because I want people to know who works at the museum, to give it a face. And at first it was kind of staff centered, but then you brought up the whole well, why don't we bring people in and have them tell their stories? And I thought, that is perfect, because again, it's not, Museum Pláticas is not about just the staff, but everybody in the community, and giving them the chance to tell their stories, I think, is very unique in our situation, because other museums really don't do that. I mean, they kind of started doing that during the pandemic, in the early 2020 and 2021. But I think the way we present these stories is not just like your typical formal presentations. I think people like Museum Pláticas, and I think people should continue to watch Museum Pláticas, because it's informal. You're kind of getting to know a person, not just like their, hi, my name's Pam, and, having that formal presentation. So I would say for, Museum Pláticas, definitely watch. We do have a podcast, so that's another one that I think a lot of people should definitely listen to. I've done a webinar on that, and we're going to be going next year to present on Pláticas and the podcast. So I think because other people, again, they're noticing our work, that definitely continue to watch Pláticas and listen to the podcast Stories from the Rio Grande.
I think that to add to what you're saying, Pam, you talk about how this is not like this super formal, highly structured, highly rigid process. That Plática is kind of like a social, cultural kind of experience, lends itself as a frame for how we do this, because it's supposed to be very cultural. It's supposed to be very very dialogical, yeah, very conversational, but it's the plática. It's how, many of us grew up, around the kitchen table, having a plática that your mother may be kind of officiating in very, informal ways. And so I think that what we're attempting to do is that we are attempting to elevate the idea of a plática to an art form.
Yeah.
That's what we're attempting to do. Now, are we being successful or not? That's really up to the community to determine whether they watch us or whether they click on it, because actually, so you're watching this, and as soon as we finish this is recorded and put on our website. So you can see this on our YouTube website, you can see this on our Facebook page. And so it's part of, what we do as a museum is we preserve it. So we have a plática with Annie Miller about the Temple Emmanuel. You know what, Annie, you've got this forever. So your community can see this. Other people, you talked about somebody from outside of the Valley scene. And so all that is part of how we're doing this. But we want to use a plática modality because we think it brings value, cultural, historical value.
It also adds to the collection because if you're watching, Annie mentioned that, they had the museum, they invited the museum to the temple and they only had 2 items. And, she basically said like, oh, the museum pretty much gave the messages, this is all we have. Well, now we have her stories. Mm-hmm. They're recorded and they're available for people to watch and listen. So it's not just like these 2 objects. It's the 2 objects plus her stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. It's because we're collecting in different kinds of ways, and we had the rabbi Nathan last year. Mm-hmm. So we have the rabbi, we have Annie, a leader, and then we have the scrapbook, and then we have the hanger still, I'm sure, And so we are building the collection for that particular constituent. So I think that's important. Tell us another story maybe about how we are using media and different kinds of technological functions to enhance the work of the museum. I mean, it's not just museum pláticas that we do, and it's not just the podcast that we do. We do other things. So talk to our friends about other things that they may want to pay attention to.
I'm just trying to think back, like I said, the collection series, I think we did one last year. But that's stuff that we're highlighting artifacts and photographs that are in our collection that are not in our exhibit. And then in the last 2 years, we've been working on, we got a grant from Humanities Texas, and they gave us the funds, awarded the funds to us so we could produce 3 videos. That was really more of a leadership type of thing because we did have a third-party production team, but Tony was involved, I was involved, and we all worked together. So we've been working with the community, and we created the 3 videos, which are going to go up in our galleries, mini theater galleries upstairs and downstairs pretty soon. So definitely keep an eye on our social media accounts for that because we're super excited to show these videos. We did produce them earlier in the year, but we updated with some information. So we're doing that, and then. So
if I could just say,
yeah,
Pam, that one of the videos is in River Frontier, and so we have a mini theater there, and so we have a video there that was produced many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, that is on the colonization of South Texas. So that's very José de Escandón, Nuevo Santander. That video is important, but we wanted to do something to enhance that because, we felt that when you come into the museum and the first thing you do when you see the galleries and the first exhibit, which is the River Frontier, you see a quote from Cabeza de Vaca, which is a very important quote. It's when Cabeza de Vaca wrote in his travel journal, "Atravesamos un gran río," we crossed a great river. And so that's in the 1530s. He publishes in 1542. But we thought, we can't really pretend that history starts here in the 1530s. And so we thought that there's a recognition, a respect that needs to be done to the history that happened human history, that happened 10,000 years before that, all the way leading up to Cabeza de Vaca. And so there's native people, indigenous people who have interacted with the earth here for thousands of years that don't quite get the recognition at the beginning. So we thought, let's do a land acknowledgement. So we're putting that video into Frontier Mini Theater. A second video is on the Underground Railroad, because families here have been telling stories about being outposts on the Underground Railroad for years, but we hadn't recognized that narrative. And now research is coming out, as part of historical inquiry, that's rigorous inquiry. And so we actually have produced a video on the Underground Railroad as it came through South Texas, and just doing the final revision on it. Then a third video will go in the third mini theater in the packing shed. And so we have the packing shed as much more of a cultural enterprise. And so those are the three videos that we've created through what you referenced as the Humanities Texas grant.
Yeah, and the thing that I also would like to add about those videos, and again, the reason why I think today in our world, video production is so important is because we've interviewed family members who, the stories that you mentioned, right, that they've been telling these stories, we have their stories now recorded via video, and they're in the museum now. They're going to be in the collections. And I just think that, again, because in the world that we live in, it's super important to have those recorded. And the fact that we're taking the initiative to do that. I think Annie might have mentioned something about having the family come together and kind of record the stories. But I feel like you also mentioned that some people feel like their stories don't matter, but they do. And I feel like if we can, show that we want your stories, we're finding ways to do that, and that is through video.
The Jackson family and the Weber family for many, many years kind of understood, but in a very subtle way, that their families had participated in the traffic of the Underground Railroad. But they weren't super clear about how the stories happened. Some were, but most of the family did not, because they hadn't recorded the stories. So just the great value of recording the stories, not only for posterity, but also for the moment, to be able to understand not only each other, but understand the community and the bigger story of the community. So that's been really key. Pam, we also produced 10 virtual tours that the public doesn't really have access to, but schools have had access to the virtual tours. So during the pandemic, right? So tell that story about how we did that, and how that's actually been quite a feather in our cap.
Yeah, so that was a whirlwind. I guess for historical context, I just feel like, honestly, the traveling through time would not have happened if Tony was not on the team. I think I would have struggled, because it is a lot of work to have produced those 10 videos. So I think that basically the way it came about was because of the pandemic, and we saw that other museums were actually doing online educational content for teachers, we kind of felt like, well, we probably should do something, And then this idea with the team, right? I think it was you, me, Renee, at the time, Maria, and her team, we're like, well, let's do these videos. And then I think we started sometime in August or September. And I mean, we met I think every week, trying to figure out how we're going to do this. And that's when we decided to do these 10 different topics, starting from, the first peoples up until the wars of the 20th century. And I think the reason why I was so excited about doing that was, again, not only did I have Tony, was we got grant money, and we used it to buy better equipment, because I think that I felt like once we go down that route, it's got to look good. We're not gonna just, oh, hey, here's the camera, even though that's all I had. And I remember Tony being like, hey, can we buy it? And I'm like, I don't have money. But when we got the grant money, it made it all that much better. So we did the 10 videos. I think we did like 2 months of recording, and then Tony took like another maybe 2 months to finish and edit. And he did all the animations, and we worked with the collections team. They gave us maps, and Tony like made animated them. Rene Ballesteros, he was on camera to kind of be like the narrator, because the whole point was to take the virtual tour through the exhibits. So we were in the exhibits. So Rene was kind of like the tour guide, and then the other three, Melissa Peña, and then I did actually about two of them. So it was a team effort, and it was a lot of work. We went through a lot of revisions, and I think we felt really good about it, and a lot of schools were super interested in it. And then you started doing workshops out of that, and then I submitted those also for awards with the Texas Association of Museums, and actually that was our best. We got a gold award for best virtual experience. So that really shows that month's process was well worth it. And I think also it is super important that we had those recorded and done, because for those who can't come to the museum, now they can, because they'll see it through the virtual tours.
There's so many lessons from that. I think one of the lessons is that you can be super creative, you can tell great stories, but if you don't have the resources to be able to purdy them up and get them out, then it's a challenge. And so having resources such as staff, such as Tony and you and Rene and Melissa, having resources such as the cameras, such as editing equipment and those kinds of things, it really becomes difficult for any institution, a museum included, to really be able to tell stories in a good quality way where there's a certain standard that you want to uphold. So clearly the human capital was the driving force, but the technologies were essential in piecing this thing together. What are we missing?
Let's see, virtual tours, Pláticas, collection series, Humanities Texas, the podcast, Planet Texas. I don't know, Planet Texas 2050. So we have that partnership with them. They're out of UT Austin. So we're working with them on this local disaster data collection. So we've gone out to the community to capture stories from people who want to share their experiences with natural disasters. So Hurricane Dolly, a lot of people have talked about Hurricane Dolly. I was 18 years old when Hurricane Dolly came to the valley, and I don't remember anything. But a lot of people had experience with that. COVID, the freeze that happened last year, Hurricane Beulah. And again, it's one of those things where it probably would not have happened had we not had this partnership with UT, with Planet Texas 2050. And I just, we went earlier this week, and Tony and I went with Ociel, who's at the front, Ociel Uribe. And I just, I said, I actually really like doing this stuff. Like, I like going out to the community, recording their stories, setting up the stuff, and like just listening to them. So that's other stuff that we're doing. I think we're gonna do an exhibit on their oral histories. Sorry, Melissa, if you're watching. I think that's what we're doing. Just another way that we're using video and audio production to capture stories of our community.
It looks like Melissa was watching. Maybe she is watching still.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Pam, thank you for this Plática. I think we had a good Museum Pláticas program today with Annie, who I think represents so much. And then I think with you giving us kind of an overview of how we're using the technologies and media to really broaden the work and to enhance the work. So thank you.
No, thank you. And also a shout out to Tony and Mars.
And so Mars would be short for Marcela Peña, who drives all the way from Brownsville to do tech support for our Museum Plática. So thank you, Marcela. And thank you, Tony. So this has been the edition of November 2022 edition of Museum Pláticas. And so we will be back with you in just a few weeks when Father Sam Arispe will join us in the December 2022 edition of Museum Pláticas. Father Sam will come on the program to have a plática about the Virgen de Guadalupe, because we're actually doing that program on the day that Juan Diego saw La Virgen de Guadalupe way back in the 1530s. And so we will commemorate that, and we will attempt to understand it even more fully with Father Sam Arispe. So we hope to have you back on December the 12th. And for now, thank you very much for joining, and stay warm these days, because we got this cold front, and we're not real sure about how to deal with a cold down here. All right, so you guys take care. Thank you.